Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Philosophical Inquiry Show. Well, where are we? Last time we explored how the origins of Western philosophy are identical with the origins of what we now call science, with those pre-Socratics, with those Malaysians, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. What were they doing? They were looking for the underlying principles. What is it that actually governs how the universe is orderly? They came up with that search for universal principles. They were looking for something in the physical world, as you would expect. They looked for things like water and air and something a little more mysterious called apeiron. And eventually, this search ends up in two polar extremes, Parmenides and Heraclitus. Parmenides offending the senses with his claim that all change is an illusion, and Heraclitus offending the intellect, claiming that there's nothing but change, top to bottom. Well, as we search to understand, as we seek to understand this ever-changing universe in which we live, the story now takes us to Athens, Greece, that intellectual center of the ancient world. I mean, as this big intellectual project, as this cultural project is getting off the ground, everything seems to gravitate right towards Athens. That's where all the great scientists go, the great philosophers, the great poets, and eventually a great group of schemers, a little group of villains that history records for us under the name the Sophists. I'll put it on the board for you. Sophists comes from the word for wisdom, Sophia. These people branded themselves the wise ones. Now, a brief aside, if I may, about the Sophists. You'll recall that way back in the introductory lecture, I told you that this series of History of Philosophy talks will follow what I call the standard story of the history of philosophy. And one thing to understand about this part of the standard story is that the standard story probably paints the Sophists a little worse than they actually were. A lot of what we know about them comes from Plato. I'll talk about him quite a bit in a future lecture. But the Sophists may have been a little bit better than how the standard story has recorded them. Nevertheless, we're sticking to the standard story. And one reason that the standard story really didn't like the Sophists was because of a particular sophist called Protagoras. I'll put his name on the board. Protagoras. You see, the Sophists came to Athens. They came into this big intellectual center, and they claimed that they could sell you wisdom for the right price, and the right price was usually very high. They claimed that they could sell you any kind of knowledge you wanted, and Protagoras in particular claimed to be able to sell you the knowledge of how to make things true. Protagoras' famous quote is, "Human beings are the determiners of all things. Human beings determine the truth," said Protagoras. This view, that there really is no truth except what's determined by human beings, is called hard relativism. Remember, Heraclitus had soft relativism. The truth is always changing. But if the truth is always changing, at least there is truth. That's what soft relativism was. And it was self-defeating, we said. Hard relativism is also self-defeating, and it's a far more insidious theory. Protagoras claimed human beings determine the truth. There is no absolute truth, according to Protagoras. There is no truth out there to be discovered. There's only truth to be determined. Protagoras, to make his point, went down to the courthouse one day, where this chap, Old Nerhamkin, he was on trial. What was he on trial for? Well, Old Nerhamkin had been practicing his javelin throwing. You see, there were Olympic Games coming up. And those Greeks, they loved their Olympic Games. So as old Nerhamkin's getting ready for the Olympic Games, throwing his javelins, he accidentally kills some poor passerby, struck in the heart with one of old Nerhamkin's javelins. So, he's on trial for what we now call manslaughter. Protagoras shows up. Hey, old Nerhamkin, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to get you off these charges. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, says Protagoras, I understand that the charge is that had old Nerhamkin not been practicing his javelin throwing, young Nerhamkin, who was killed, old Nerhamkin killed young Nerhamkin, I'm afraid, young Nerhamkin would still be alive had old Nerhamkin not been practicing his javelin throwing. And that's why you're convicting him? Well, let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, says Protagoras, why are we not trying the javelin manufacturer? After all, had the javelin manufacturer not been producing javelins, young Nerhamkin would still be alive. And let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, why are we not trying the hosts, the organizers of the Olympic Games? Had they not organized Olympic Games, old Nerhamkin wouldn't have been out there practicing javelin throwing. It's a rather silly thing to do absent Olympic Games. So, we should put them on trial for the death of young Nerhamkin. This kind of deceptive rhetoric is what the Sophists were engaged in. We still have a word for it to this day. If you go into court and try those kinds of ridiculous arguments, we call it sophistry. The Sophists were practicing sophistry. And for the right amount of money, the Sophists could teach you or your children how to be successful Sophists. Well, this is a threat to the entire intellectual empire, right? This is a threat to the entire project, the entire scientific and philosophical project, which had begun in Turkey. If there's no truth to be discovered, only truth to be determined, well, then our entire enterprise just falls apart. The entire project, the entire search for truth, scientific truth, moral truth, and philosophical truth falls apart if we accept the Sophists' claim of hard relativism. Scary, isn't it? Yes, it is. And it especially scared a guy called Socrates. Socrates, the thorn in the side of the Sophists. Socrates taught pretty much nothing. It's fair to say Socrates did not have any body of doctrine that he was trying to expound, the way, say, Anaximander was, the way, say, Parmenides was, right? They're trying to advance philosophical theories. Not our boy Socrates. Socrates was convinced that the Sophists couldn't be right. The Sophists could not be right in saying that human beings determine the truth. There has to be some truth for society to even function. So Socrates went on a mission of what we call the mission of Socratic method. Socratic method consists of this: asking questions to expose your interlocutor's ignorance. What's an interlocutor? It's a person that you're asking questions of. It's the person you're discussing something with. So most of what we know about Socrates is actually recorded in dialogues, little plays, written by his student Plato. Socrates wrote nothing down. We have a couple of other people who wrote things about Socrates, but 90% of what we know about Socrates comes from things written by his student, Plato. Plato tells us that what Socrates did was went around Athens. He went to the various sophists, asking questions. That's all. And he would ask questions until they would end up contradicting themselves or making fools of themselves. An example, if you'd like. A particularly famous example comes from when Socrates was in the waiting room of the courthouse. I'll talk a little more about why he was in the courthouse here in a moment and in the next lecture. But while he's there, Socrates runs into a young man named Euthyphro. And if you want to read their exchange, Plato recorded it for us. You can look up a text called Euthyphro. E-U-T-H, Y-P-H-R-O, Euthyphro. Socrates, says Euthyphro, what are you doing here? It's so good to see you. Ugh, Euthyphro, says Socrates, it's so rough out there. I've been accused in court of being impious, of being anti-holiness. Oh, dear, says Euthyphro. Socrates, everyone loves you. Everyone knows you're just a gentle old man. I mean, some of the Sophists, and Socrates, I'm friends with some of the Sophists, but I know they're a little upset with you. But, we'll get over this, Socrates. Socrates now leaps into action. Euthyphro, did you just say that you're friends with some of these Sophists? Oh, yes, Socrates, says the young Euthyphro. I'm starting to, in fact, take some of their courses. I understand that they're very good at the wisdom game. That's why they're called Sophists. Well, what are you learning about? Asks Socrates. Well, says Euthyphro, actually, I think I'll be able to help you, Socrates. I actually just finished a course of talks from one of the Sophists all about holiness. You're accused of being anti-holiness, of being impious. Yes, says Socrates, I am. Perhaps you can help me. How? Asks Euthyphro. How do you want me to help you? I'll teach. Socrates, I guess I can. I guess I'll teach you for free, Socrates. I'm not really a fully qualified sophist yet. I can't charge for these talks, but Socrates, how about if I teach you what holiness is? Oh, Euthyphro, so kind of you to take time out of your day to teach an old man like me the secrets of holiness. And the best part of it, Euthyphro, is that when I'm in court, I'll tell them everything you tell me. And if they're not happy with it, I'll just say, don't blame me, blame the child of the Sophists, Mr. Euthyphro. And Euthyphro realizes this is his chance. I mean, if he gets known as the one who taught the great Socrates the secrets of holiness, what a wonderful opportunity it will be for him to advance in the ranks of the Sophists. So, says Euthyphro, Socrates, let me give you the definition of holiness. Just act like me. I'm a holy guy. Do the sorts of things I do. I'm always giving money to the right places and treating the right people with respect. Just be like me, Socrates. That's holiness. Okay, says Socrates. Interesting definition you've proposed. I'd like to ask some follow-up questions. Mr. Euthyphro, it seems to me you've not even actually given the essence. Says Euthyphro. The what? The essence. You see, Socrates is starting to stumble on the what we philosophers talk about as the search for essences. Socrates is getting at it. Socrates is realizing that there is something stable. There is something unchanging. The definitions of the words. Euthyphro, says Socrates, you've not given me a definition at all. You've just given me this example. You've just pointed to an example of holiness. What you do. Don't give me a list of examples, Euthyphro. Give me a definition. Get me to the essence of holiness. And by the way, many of the conversations that Plato records for us from Socrates go just like this. Socrates asks a question. What is love? What is justice? What is beauty? And the initial answers that his interlocutors give are always like this. They're always a list of examples. But Socrates is never content with a list of examples. He wants essences. Oh, dear Socrates, says Euthyphro, I suppose you're right. Socrates, how is this for the essence of holiness? What the gods love. Okay, says Socrates, now we're getting somewhere. If I could just push a little bit, Euthyphro, don't the gods fight with each other sometimes? I mean, that's part of our mythos, right? Well, yes, Socrates, the gods do sometimes fight. Then Socrates pushes on. Well, surely they don't fight about stupid stuff. Surely they fight about important stuff. Yes, Socrates, that would be right. They fight about the stuff they really care about. They would not fight about something petty. They would only fight about what's truly dear to the gods. Well, Euthyphro, says Socrates, what do you suppose is truly dear to the gods? Is it not holiness? Oh, yes, Socrates, I think I see where you're going with this series of questions. It will be holiness that the gods are fighting about. Okay, Euthyphro, if holiness is what the gods are fighting about, if they're fighting about what is and isn't holy, then it doesn't do us much good to define holiness as what the gods love. Now, does it? Socrates, says Euthyphro, surely you will allow me an opportunity to tweak my definition. And Socrates, like any good philosopher, says, of course. That's what we're doing. We're having a conversation to see how we need to tweak our definitions. Socrates, may I offer this revised definition? Holiness is what every god loves. When they're in agreement, that is the holy. Bravo, says Socrates. And since we're now talking about all the gods, can we just assume there's just one? Socrates didn't actually say that, but it'll help us think about where it's going. We'll just talk about the god. Holiness is what God loves. Yes, that's right, Socrates, that's what I said. Holiness is what God loves. Oh, boy, Euthyphro. Euthyphro, says Socrates. I think we got a problem if holiness is what the gods love. What is it, Socrates? Euthyphro, it's an argument. It's an argument that will henceforth be known to every future generation of philosophers as the Euthyphro Dilemma. Here it comes, the Euthyphro Dilemma. Euthyphro, tell me this. If holiness is what the gods love, then it seems to be the case that either the god loves what is holy because it's holy, or it's holy because God loves it. That's what he asked, and Euthyphro agreed. What's it mean? It means, look, if you say, pizza is your favorite dish, right? Either it's your favorite dish because you like it, or you like it because it's your favorite dish, right? It can't be both. Obviously, it's your favorite dish because you like it. You don't say, what should I like? I'll like my favorite dish. That's what I'll... No, something becomes your favorite dish on account of you liking it. Well, Socrates is trying to figure out what's going on with holy things. Are things good because God loves them? Or does God love something because it's good? We've got two choices. Either something is good because God loves it, or God loves it because it's good, right? If you're going to define holiness and goodness in terms of God's love, those are your two options. God loves it because it's holy, or it's holy because God loves it. Well, which is it? Euthyphro decides to try the first horn of the dilemma. It's called the dilemma because you have two options. Well, says Euthyphro, things are good because God loves them. Ah, says Socrates. Here's the thing, Euthyphro. If something is good because God loves it, if something is good because God loves it, well then, goodness, holiness, comes out to be rather capricious and arbitrary. What do I mean? I mean, what would have happened if God got his kicks from watching people put out cigarettes in babies' eyes? Then that would be good and holy. Yeah, says Euthyphro, that doesn't sound good. Well, says Socrates, you're saying, Euthyphro. I didn't say it, you said it. You said, what is good because God loves it. You said things are holy on account of God loving them. Well, you've just said that it's quite possible that it could have turned out that murder and theft and putting out cigarettes in babies' eyes, those could have been good, you're saying? Whoa, says Euthyphro. Socrates. I guess I didn't think that one out far enough. Socrates, give me a chance to revise a little more. Of course, Euthyphro. Please, let's get to the bottom of this before I have to go into the courtroom. Socrates, says Euthyphro, I meant to choose the other horn of the dilemma. God loves good things because they're good. Whoa, says Socrates. If God loves good things because they're good, the same way we do, for example, then God's not omnipotent. God doesn't control what's good or not. God looks around, sees good things, and loves them because they're good. But surely God should be able to control, should be omnipotent, all-powerful, decider of the good. If God loves good things because they're good, if God loves holy things because they're holy, well, then God's not omnipotent. I'll say that premise again if you can't read it. If God loves good things because they are good, well, then God isn't omnipotent. This is a good place for you to stop the recording if you have to. Make sure you can get each of these premises in your own words. How would you explain them to your little brother or sister if you had to? Well, says Socrates, he springs his trap now. Euthyphro, you've agreed with me that, given what you said, that the holy, the good, is what God loves, that Socrates springs his trap. Those of you paying close attention will notice a video skip just happened. Socrates springs his trap and says, look, Euthyphro, what you just told me, either something is good because God loves it, or God loves it because it's good. You agreed that if God loves it because it's good, God's not omnipotent. You agreed that if something is good because God loves it, then that means goodness comes out arbitrary and capricious. Well, Euthyphro, I now have for you an argument. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, and you know what the conclusion is? Can you see it? Can you see it? Stop the recording if you'd like. Write out the 3 premises. See if you can see what the conclusion is. Line number 4, either God isn't omnipotent or goodness is capricious and arbitrary. That's the conclusion from these 3 premises. Well, that's not very good, says Euthyphro. I don't like that conclusion at all. Well, says Socrates. That's the conclusion you get from exactly what you said. This is Socratic method in action. Well, says Euthyphro, I don't know what to do. Socrates, you can read the Euthyphro dialogue if you'd like. Socrates tries to walk Euthyphro through a proper definition. He tries to walk Euthyphro through searching for a genus for holiness, but then they can't settle on a specific difference. The dialogue ends in what philosophers call, here's a fancy word, aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A. Aporia, it just means a knot in the thinking. Like a knot in a rope, an aporia is a knot in the thinking that you can't loosen. Everywhere they turn in this discussion, it turns out that Euthyphro, who claimed to be an expert on holiness after hearing these sophists talk a bit, Euthyphro is in fact completely ignorant about the nature of goodness and holiness. And the dialogue ends, as many of the recordings that we have of Socrates talking to people does, with Euthyphro saying, well, look at the time, I gotta go. And he runs off. In 399 BC, the Sophists, a group of Sophists, led by a guy called Miletus, not to be confused with the city of Miletus, where this all got started, Miletus called Socrates to trial. You see, in ancient Athens, anyone could try anyone for just about anything. And Miletus did call Socrates to trial for being unholy, being anti-holiness. Socrates, as was the custom, gave his own defense. He gave a speech in his own defense. Now, a speech in one's defense, in Greek, is called an apologia. Or in English, you might just say apology. But not apology like, I'm sorry. No, it's a different kind of apology. It's an account. It's an explanation of what one did. Well, if you have time before going to the next lecture, you might look up the text called The Apology of Socrates, written by Plato. You might read it. It's about 20 pages, or you might listen to an audio version of it. Go ahead and go through it before the next lecture if you have time, because the next lecture will be me talking all about the Apology of Socrates. See you then.